John V. Welcome to Chautauqua People. This is the first interview of the 2020 season. My guest today is Dave Beeson, who graduated from Shaker Heights High School and Miami University of Ohio. Regular viewers will notice that we are at a different table. This table is 72 inches long, selected to comply with COVID virus requirements for 6 feet of social distancing. And now that we're far enough apart, you can see what Dave looks like. And take off your mask, sir.
We are 6 feet apart, right?
The 6 foot table.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right, thanks. Thank you, feel much better.
And indeed, we had to talk about this pre-production to make certain that we were at the standard. Now, Dave's grandmother started coming to Chautauqua in the early 1900s. He initially came to Chautauqua for a week or two, and then started coming for the entire summer when his family acquired the cottage on the site of his present home. After working for the steel industry for several decades, he moved to Chautauqua as a full-time resident in 1988. Dave, what were some of the activities you participated in as a young person at Chautauqua?
Well, the first thing that I sort of remember, the first summer I was here, I got a job working at Boys and Girls Club, but I don't think I was of legal working age, and I think somehow they snuck me under the sheet, so to speak, and I was a counselor in training at that time, and I think I made a whopping $25 for the summer, which it got me a little junior gate pass, and so the following years I was on the waterfront staff at Boys and Girls Club, and that's sort of where the sailing kind of kicked in. My parents bought a sailfish. Probably everyone's familiar with a sunfish, but the sailfish and the sunfish came out at the same time. It was made by Alcourt, was the company that made them. And they also made a wood boat in a kit, and you could make your own sunfish if you wish. So my brother and I basically learned how to sail on a sailfish. And of course, the first time you do anything, you wonder, are you ever going to figure out this thing? Because we'd go out there and tip over and get the boat back up and tip over again. But that's how you learn. And we got to the point where we couldn't wait for the weather to really get bad, because that meant the wind was blowing more, and that was more fun. So we could get going faster, we'd tip over faster. And that sort of started my sailing avenue.
How has the sailing experience affected you?
Well, it's probably been a very important part of my life. You belong to a club, you get to know other people better than obviously if you hadn't belonged to them. And we, some of us travel to various other lakes for regattas, and you get to meet other people. So it's kind of a little fraternity. And once you've got the sailing bug, it's probably something you're not going to get rid of easily. So it stays with you, and unfortunately, right at the moment, I'm not doing a lot of racing that I would like to do, but part of that's due to getting up in years, and that happens to all of us. So I'm trying to mend my knees and get back on the boat here. So
right. Now, step away from sailing for just a minute. I understand you befriended a former president here at Chautauqua. How did that happen?
Oh. Well, I'm not sure exactly which experience. I had two experiences, actually with both the same gentleman. The funniest one of the two was I'm skirting in time here a little bit. So I'm back working as a sailing director at Boys and Girls Club. So we're in the 1990s now. And a friend of mine came that year and wanted just someone that wanted to come to Chautauqua to kind of get away. Chautauqua was a good place to regroup. And so I asked him if he wanted to come down and help me at club run the sailing program, and he agreed, and I split my salary with him that year. So instead of making $50, I made $25. That was a joke. So, but we were asked that year because this gentleman's name was Vin Morgan, by the way, and Vin was an interesting person if you knew him. And that winter, Vinny and I sat down and we worked on a beginning adult sailing program that would be offered through the Special Studies program at Chautauqua. And it wasn't anything super great, but nothing like that had been offered at Chautauqua, so we were getting some interest in it. And along about the first or second week of that particular season, I think Jack Volker came to us and said, "Hey, how would you guys like to be on the radio and get interviewed, and you could talk about your sailing program, and maybe that'd help get some people?" And I said, "Oh, great, we'd like that." So it was the Jim Roselli show that went on for years and years and years here, and I think Jim had, if I'm not mistaken, had the longest running talk show in the country, I think, from a longevity standpoint. And so we agreed to do that, and they told us to come up at, I think it was like 11:15, because Jim usually interviewed the speaker that morning, the 10:45 morning speaker. So I'm kind of scratching my head a little bit, and I said, "Well, don't they want to ask us don't they want to have a pre-thing, and so I know what to be prepared for?" And they said, "Don't worry, Jim will ask you." And as we're walking up, Vinny says to me, "Dave, you're going to sit next to Jim Roselli." And I kind of looked, and so Vinny apparently was a little smarter at this than I was on this subject, because I said, "Oh, okay." So as we get up to where Jim was doing the interviewing, there's a tremendous crowd there. And I'm thinking to myself, egotistically, all these people came up here to see Vinny and me do this interview with Jim Roselli. And as we get closer, I can hear the interview still going on. And I said to Vinny, I said, "Well, they're not here seeing us. They must be here seeing this guy or something." And so the guy's standing over here, and I said, "Who's Roselli interviewing?" And the guy says, "I don't know. It's something about," and I hadn't read my daily that morning, so I didn't have any notion on who it was. And he said, "He's the governor of Arkansas," and they're interviewing him. And so Roselli gets done interviewing Bill Clinton, and Clinton leaves along with the whole crowd. And I'm sitting there, and what I thought was a nice big bubble about they'd all come up to see us, now everyone's gone, and it kind of got deflated. I said, "It was terrible." So anyway, we sit down, and Jim says, "We're on a commercial break and we'll be back." And so someone says, "Get ready, Jim," and 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So Jim says, when he comes back, he says, "Boy, that was a stimulating conversation or interview I had with Bill Clinton. And what a terrific guy, and he's got these programs and everything." And he said, "I'd sure vote for him, wouldn't you, Dave?" He hands me the mic. And I had been thinking all this time, certainly not politics. And I sat there, and what seemed like an eternity which was probably 5 seconds, but my mind's racing. What do I say? Because I didn't know anything about him. I didn't know. So about the only thing I could think of, or the quickest thing that I could think of, was I came back to Jim and I said, well, is he a Democrat or a Republican? And that brought the house down. Because so everyone was sitting there laughing, and that broke the ice, and off we went. But I was hoping, you wouldn't ask me anything that was that embarrassing, because I said I wasn't going to do another interview after that, because that was terrible. I mean, it was funny in the long run, and of course it went over the radio, and it was live. So
yeah.
What you said was live.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, that was kind of an interesting.
Well, let's have an easier question for you.
I wish.
Can you tell me about what the primary boat that is raced on the lake today at Iran?
Well, today, it's certainly gone through a series of class boats, starting. We had a lot of comets and snipes back in the 50s, and then we had a lot of lightnings in the 60s and 70s. And I would say lately our yacht club has probably had more sea scows than any other class. And at one point in time we had over 40 registered boats in our fleet, sea scow boats, which made us the largest sea scow fleet in the country for a while. We're not that now, but it's kind of nice to tell someone you're from the largest sea scow fleet in the United States, actually the world, because there aren't any.
Can we see what one of those looks like?
Well, I did bring a couple pictures.
Great. This was taken at a regatta, and we would have a regatta in June, and most of these are Chautauqua boats, and you see that there's a CX on most of the sails, and CX stands for our Chautauqua Lake. Our yacht club here, there's another yacht club down in Lakewood, and they go by, I believe, CL. Mm-hmm. So, contrary to a lot of other class boats, our nomenclature isn't when the boat comes off the manufacturer. So, like, for example, in a Lightning, the oldest Lightning would be number 1. Mm-hmm. And then as the boats were produced, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to where they are now. Right.
The scows, for some reason, put their lake nomenclature up here, and then sort of arbitrarily pick out their own number. Mm-hmm. So whatever this number is here, 15 or 51 really doesn't mean anything, but it might be, that's how old this guy is, who knows.
Right,
so,
right.
So this was taken at Chautauqua. This is kind of an advertisement for Melgus, which is the only manufacturer for the boat at the moment. The Sea Scow is like a 20-foot long boat. It's flat bottom, which in a rounded nose bow, which most people think of a boat. The front of the boat comes to a point. Mm-hmm. This particular class boat, it's flat bottom, and all of the scows have a rounded front end. So instead of going kind of through the water, this type of boat kind of goes over the water.
Got it.
And they normally have a crew of 2 people. On a windy day, you'd take a third person out, and they're a lot of fun. You get exercise. You build your stomach and leg muscles up, and hope you don't tip over. I brought this one because it was kind of a historic picture a little bit. This is a old Sea Scow taken, I'm guessing, in the 50s. It's a wood Sea Scow, which obviously all boats back then were made out of wood. Mm-hmm. This one, as time went on, the mast got to be what they call a swivel mast. So the mast will actually swivel rotate maybe 30, 40 degrees on each side every time you change tack. This particular mast is not a swivel mast, and that's the way they built them back then. The other thing that's sort of unique about the scow is they don't have what you would think of as a centerboard. They have two, I don't want to call them centerboards because they're off to the side, but some people call them lee boards or bilge boards. And depending what tack you're on, you will lower one board and raise the other, and then when you come about, you drop the board that was up, you drop it down, tack over, and then pull your other board up. So that's a little different than most sailing boats.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Now, what other, just sort of quickly, why don't you tell us some of the parts you would teach a student? You got a line diagram there of one of these boats, do we not?
Well,
And let the
this is a great little book, and I don't know if you can get your hands on it. It's put out by the American Red Cross and U.S. Sailing, and but we used this for teaching a long time ago, and I kept one of the editions because it was a good boat for, or a good book for younger people as older people, because it kind of simplified things. And not that we want to go through a lot of things here, but if a boat has maybe 5 parts, you have to have a boat, you have to have a mast, you have to have a sail, you have to have a rudder, you have to have a tiller to steer it, and then other things come into play. But
Right.
all boats pretty much have those things. So this particular boat they're showing, this boat here has 2 sails. We have a mainsail and a jib. We have people hiking, and their feet will be in a hiking strap. When the wind blows, the boat will have a tendency to heel up, and it gets to be a little bit of a balancing act. You try to keep the boat on an even keel going through the water. This is the mast, and you have some stays that hold the mast and hold the mast upright. The boom is the bottom part of the sail. People joke about the boom because if you don't duck, you get hit in the head. This is the rudder and the tiller and a tiller extension that people hold on to. And in this particular case, they show a centerboard. And the centerboard is, like it says, it's in the middle of the boat, and the people can raise it or lower it, depending on what you're doing at that particular time. So your sail, usually most sails are triangular in shape. So you have 3 points of sail. You got a head, a tack, and a clew. And those are just the terminology for the sail. And you have a leech and a luff and the foot of the sail. So most triangular sails, that's common knowledge. And then over here we have some tuning devices. We have a boom, what's called a boom vang, and that is attached to the boom. And in windy days, you pull that down, which pulls the boom down, flattens your sail out a little bit, and theoretically is depowering your boat. So that's what you want to do in heavy weather. You want to find ways to depower your boat so you're not overheeling. So this has something called a downhaul or a Cunningham. I used to joke in the class, I said, you know what a Cunningham is, everyone? They said, no, what's Cunningham? We call it sometimes a clever pig. So you have to think about that one a little bit. If you think long enough, a cunning ham is a clever pig. I didn't say I was good at jokes, but that when we taught the class, I'd usually wake them up finally, and I'd usually get a boo or a hiss on that one.
Yeah.
So not too complicated, but so kind of the smaller the boat, the simpler the way it's rigged, and
that works. those are the parts you would learn for most types. Now, what other boats have been on the lake historically that probably preceded these?
Well, there's all sorts of what we call cruising boats.
Okay.
And they usually are in the 22 to 35 foot range. They normally have a adjustable, some of them have an adjustable keel, and some of them have a fixed keel. And if you can picture a boat that has something dragging below it that's maybe 4 feet below the thing, below the hull of the boat, you have to be a little careful how shallow a water you get into, because all of a sudden you're on the bottom. So some of those bigger boats have to be moored out on a buoy, because they can't bring them into a dock or into a... but we've had an assortment of boats on the lake that, you don't have to... We talk a lot about racing, but to enjoy sailing, you don't have to race the boat. Mm-hmm. Just going out on a Sunday cruise, so to speak, can be very relaxing and a family type of sport that a lot of people do. And I think particularly this summer, with the virus being an issue, I think you'll probably see more and more people in boats, because it's a way to get out and get away, and you can be socially distanced. If your family's there, you're not interfering with anyone else. So it's a great sport and a good
Great. Let's just talk for a moment, for competition for a moment, go back. And I understand we've had some national regattas for the scows here. How many of them have there been, and what are they like?
Well, this was a great thing for our little yacht club. The National Regatta was considered one of the main regattas. They have it every year. It's sort of an invitational type of regatta, so anyone can enter into it. Mm-hmm. But what happens is you get the cream of the crop that show up over here, because it's everyone likes to say, well, I won the National Sea Scow Regatta. And we'd never had anything to that magnitude at Chautauqua. So I believe the first one was back in the late 90s, I believe. Mm-hmm. And we got a total of 82 boats. And I don't know if we got all 82 at the starting line, but I think we had a high 70 or 80 count at the starting line. So if you can picture 80 boats at a starting line, and you're theoretically supposed to have a boat and a half length. If you're measuring your starting line, you're supposed to take your number of boats and multiply by a number, and if you multiply 80 boats by 30 feet, you got 2,400 thing. It's like a half a mile starting line. So wow. Very impressive. We had a couple of shots from the air. We had the banquet at the hotel. That was kind of spectacular, and people that came in and out of town they were impressed with that. And then we had a total of 3, to answer your question, 3 national regattas. The first one was the largest number-wise, and then the second and third were in the 50s and 60 count, but it's still very respectable. And if you did good in one of the races, you felt good that day.
So that's significant.
Yeah.
Now let me ask a couple more questions here. How long does it take you to teach somebody to be a competent sailor? And you got a motivated young person wants to come in and really learn it, working hard. Well,
probably a tough question to answer in the Chautauqua vernacular, because I'll try to answer what you're asking. You probably need to do a good job with someone, to go through all the facets and rules and equipment and repair and everything. You probably need 3 weeks of something every day for 3 weeks. And I think
Pretty
some
much-
people maybe even go 4 weeks. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen here at Chautauqua because we get so many people that are only here for a week, or maybe 2 weeks, and their time is limited, and so it's hard to get someone to be what you'd like them to be, primarily from a time restraint. So.
Right.
You do the best you can with what you got.
And that's it. You make the most of the time available.
You're right. So
Let me ask another question here. So
Sure.
we don't have enough time typically for new Chautauquans these days because they're distracted and they're not here long enough. We have a center there called the Beeson Center. Tell me a little bit about the origin of that, if you would.
well, I guess you may or may not know. My parents back in the '60s were involved in a plane crash, and I have a brother and a sister, and we basically took some of our premature inheritance that we wished we hadn't gotten that early, but that's the way it went. And there was an old building there called the Athletic Building. And it had 2 little bowling alleys, and it was a cute building, and a ramp that went across the street to the ball diamond at one point in time. And it got one of these buildings at Chautauqua that just gets into disrepair, and it was a lot due to, because it was right on the water there, and the cement foundation was cracking, and it really got to be a health problem that they almost had to condemn the place, and so
Yeah.
they wound up tearing it down. And with the help of my brother and sister, we donated some money. And Chautauqua loves for you to give them money because then you can put your name on something. So that's kind of what happened, and I think they've made good use out of it. It has living quarters in the building, and where the administration lives, and arts and crafts, and the office for people to register is there. So it's, I think, been a good building.
Thank you for the many people who have benefited from that.
Yes.
I got one last question, and to me it's a very important one to think of what we're doing at Chautauqua. And if a young Chautauquan came to you and expressed an interest in sailing and wants a career in sailing, asking for advice, what would be your counsel?
Well, that's a good question. And when you said, I think the key to your question that you asked me, he's looking for a career, which means he's made his mind up that this is what he wants to do later on in life. Nothing is worse than trying to push someone in an area that they don't want to be pushed in.
Right.
So, unfortunately, this summer at Chautauqua with the virus, and we don't have our sailing program up and running, but assuming that wasn't happening, first thing I would tell this person is nothing beats experience. So the more time you can spend in a boat, the more time you can practice, the more time you can try to figure out what went wrong that afternoon, or if you're in a race and someone got ahead of you and you didn't think, you have to sit and analyze, well, what did I maybe do, what could I have done differently? So nothing like experience, but there's other things you can do. There's a lot of companies that work with boats. There's boat manufacturers, there's sailmakers. That's a great place to spend a little time, is with a sailmaker, because you're talking all sorts of different types of boats, and you get to meet some interesting people, and there's some great colleges that have a sailing department, and they compete back and forth with each other. And you'd be surprised, the Ivy League schools, Boston College is up there as one of the better ones, and of course they're all over the country, California, Florida, Carolinas. So if you're that determined, then I certainly would say, go look at one of these schools where you can get sailing. And some of them turn out some really high quality people that just dominate the events that they're in, and you wonder how one person can make a boat go fast and this person makes it go super fast. So it's there's an art to it and a feel for it, and so that would be my best. You know, it's doing it, spending the time,
And having fun.
and most of the time you're having fun. Yes,
That's
you are.
great. That's great. Dave, we are out of time, and this has been great fun. And if this was not the COVID-19, I'd reach across the table and shake your hand.
Well,
But thank you very much, and I hope we'll come back and talk sailing some more.
well, thank you, and I wanted to thank you for inviting me. I think you could have invited 50 other people, but I'm honored you
Well,
picked
you
me. And
you have made such an impact on sailing to so many people, and those of us involved in the program, such as our associate producer Nancy Barger, but we're long overdue to have you at the table and to talk sailing.
okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.